Atheists, you know less than you think, and it's religion's fault. Now, do you know more than the average Christian? Absolutely. But that's less to do with you knowing everything about religion and more to do with the failure of Christianity, especially within Catholicism, in teaching the faithful what it actually teaches. So what usually ends up happening is there's an extremely surface level understanding of Catholicism, and this understanding falls apart under scrutiny. This leads people to leaving the faith and are convinced that they have the entirety of the faith. For example, many people grew up learning oversimplified concepts like God will punish you for your sins, or being good gets you to heaven, without understanding the deeper theology behind those teachings. So someone might leave the faith after encountering arguments like, why would a loving God send people to hell? A question that has detailed theological responses but is rarely addressed in depth in Sunday school. So when they encounter this argument and don't have an answer to something they have devoted their life to, they think that such an answer doesn't exist, and they end up leaving the faith and then start to believe that this shallow version of Catholicism is the entirety of the faith. That's not the case. Something that's actually helped me in my journey is the realization that I'm not that original. Anytime I've come across an argument against a particular position, I look around and discover that not only had that particular argument existed long before, but an answer to it had already existed. For example, you have Anselm's ontological argument for the existence of God. Well, a lot of the common arguments that exist nowadays, like the horse that exists that I can conceive of greater than any horse that already exists, that argument was already created against Anselm during Anselm's life. And the great thing is that Anselm actually did have a response to that argument. Now, what does that have to do with today's video? All too often on both sides, individuals are convinced, ironically enough, not of their position, but of the position that their opposition must have. And this is the worst mindset to have in any kind of dialogue. Because then you're no longer listening or engaging with the person and their idea, but with an argument of your own creation. Literally a straw man. And in my experience, when I'm presenting my position and show how it is supported by the church, I'm often told that I'm wrong and the church doesn't teach that. However, there is no evidence being provided by that individual. So, how does one combat this aspect of human nature? Funnily enough, it's the easiest thing to understand conceptually, yet it's the hardest to actually practice. You need to argue for your position and your position alone. Don't make the argument on behalf of your interlocutor, or assume you know where they are going with their argument. Engage with what's been said, and only with what's been said, not what you think they're going to say. An example of what I'm talking about is the notion of hell. On the subreddit Catholic Apologetics, I've presented several topics of hell, its nature, the hope for an empty hell, and the type of person one is in order for them to be in hell. What ends up surprising a lot of people is that this version of hell is very different from the popular notion of hell that is out there. In fact, it is so different that the popular argument of God is evil for forcing people into hell simply for not believing in him because they did not have knowledge of him doesn't work. Now here's the thing, I agree, if that is indeed what is taught and believed by the church, that would indeed be an evil God. However, that is not the nature of hell, or the means by which one ends up in hell. What I often see, however, when I present what the church actually teaches, the individual I'm speaking with will try to force what I said to fit into the shallow version of hell that they are familiar with. Instead of listening to what I said, they want to attack the argument that they are familiar with and comfortable with dismantling. And so they will do anything they can to try to make my argument fit within that worldview. Now, just like atheists will mock or make fun of Christians for the straw men that are created of atheists, atheists are guilty of doing the exact same thing, where they create and attack straw men of Christianity as well. Now, granted, it's not your fault, as it's often not taught properly to the faithful in the first place. However, when engaging with someone who teaches or says something that's contrary to your understanding of the faith, or anything really, refrain from trying to force the individual into your preconceived box. Understand that you don't know everything, that there are always going to be individuals out there who know more than you, and you might be speaking with such an individual. If you're claiming that the person you're speaking to is wrong, that's a claim, and that requires proof. You being unconvinced of the other individual is not the same as the other individual being wrong. The different possible realities for any discussion is one person's right, both are wrong, one is right but did a poor job explaining it, or finally, an individual is correct, but the other individual is unable to grasp it for one reason or another, whether it's their fault or not. So when you're presented with something new and you've never heard it before, research it. Consider that this is new evidence that you had no idea existed. Now, this doesn't mean you are wrong or even admitting that you are wrong. In fact, in order to be intellectually rigorous, one must explore all aspects as soon as new information is provided, even if it means rejecting a preconceived notion. A saying that's relevant: never theorize before you have data. Invariably, you end up twisting facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. We all must be aware of this danger. In fact, another saying that's also relevant: the mind responds to a new idea the way that the body responds to a new protein. It rejects it. Our first response to any new information is to outright reject it, but that is a detriment to intellectual rigor and our ability to come to new information. And Christians, study your faith beyond Sunday school. There is such a rich history that's untapped by many. Too often, faith formation stops at childhood lessons, stories about Noah's Ark, Moses parting the Red Sea, Jesus' miracles. But the depth of Christian theology, history, and philosophy extends far beyond these basics. There is 2 millennia worth of ideas, thoughts, discussions, arguments, history that is left untapped by many of the faithful. A video that represents what I am discussing extremely well can be found on Kevin Non-Tradcath's channel. I'll link in the description, but Kevin had mentioned that there was a church council that declared icons to be sinful, then a later council negated that declaration. And if true, it actually invalidates an argument and position that I had made in that video. If you'll notice though, instead of declaring him to be wrong and insisting that because it was contrary to my experience and I had never heard of such a thing before, it must not be true. Instead, I asked him for the counsels in question. I reserved judgment. Just because you didn't know something doesn't mean that you are wrong. It could be that the person misunderstood the evidence. It could be that your ultimate conclusion is not that affected by that particular point. Now, it could be that the side point you had made does need to be reformed to help strengthen your position. Ignorance is not something to be ashamed of, and I think, contrary to what is often said, atheists, well, I guess humans in general, are afraid to admit when they were not aware of something, especially if it requires an extreme change of lifestyle. Science is often a safe place with its ignorance. Does it matter to the way you live if Mars has water or not, if the Earth is flat or not, if there are white holes or not? No. Because you will continue to live your life the same way regardless of the discoveries of science. But if there is a right way to live, a moral system, a God, that requires real change. And there is bliss in that ignorance. Religion demands change. It demands a particular way of life, so it is scary. Because of that, I don't necessarily blame atheists, because it is not their fault for where they currently are. What is their responsibility, though, is what they do moving forward. Another relevant saying that I'll paraphrase: there is no shame in being wrong. The shame is in remaining ignorant. There is nothing new under the sun. Just because something predated you doesn't make it wrong. Newton was wrong about his physics on an astronomical scale. But is his physics correct or useful on a planetary scale? Absolutely. It's why we still study and use it. We don't use the theory of relativity to predict the path of a ball being thrown. we use Newtonian physics. So just because a particular argument predated a particular study in science or any other field of study for that matter, it doesn't make it wrong or the creator of said argument enigma. I think Kant is wrong about some things, but he still has a lot of great contributions to philosophy. Same for Hume, Nietzsche, Plato, and even Aquinas. The mistake, I believe, is people want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's not how truth works, nor is it logical to do so. But it is the easy thing to do, which is why we see it happen so often. Heck, even Martin Luther was right about some things, but that doesn't mean everything he said was right, or vice versa. In conclusion, real dialogue begins with humility, an acknowledgement that no one possesses all knowledge on everything. Whether you're a theist, atheist, or somewhere in between, take the time to deeply understand your position, challenge it, and grow from the experience. Most importantly, keep an open mind and embrace the unknown. Because the best conversations happen when we stop assuming and start truly listening.